Alright, continuing with Dallas Pimiento, Book 1, Bronco. No fruit juice, no caffeine, just spicy beans. Despite Jack Barron's, Norman Spinrad's, famous line, I have decided to sell out. This selling out takes the form of giving in to my cartoonish tendencies and impulses and painting on smaller canvases. The latter is something people have been begging me to do for years. Nathan had had the advantage of being a scout in a large, well-financed and organized troop in the city. When he began helping out with a rural troop run under the auspices of a small church, the pain was sometimes evident on his face. It must have been like a brain surgeon watching primitives perform trephination. His mother, a nurse at one of the hospitals in the city, sympathized with him. "I'm very proud of you," she told him as she poured him a glass of milk. Did a flicker of concern cross her face as she watched her son drink? Recent studies she had been privy to suggested that milk might not be as good for you as people had thought. In fact, it might be downright deleterious. Already Nathan was getting a big, solid, squarish butt, and he had only made Eagle the year before. Where did he get that butt from? It certainly wasn't from her. His father didn't have a butt like that, nor that thickness to his legs. Was it from milk or products of a similar nature, products long beloved of the American people, not yet suspected? "Still, you're not fat," she said as she sipped her own milk. "Who are you talking to?" Nathan asked. "Oh, no one," she laughed, stunned that she had spoken aloud. "Mom," Nathan said in his joking, friendly manner, which I never had with either of my parents, "are those bitches at the hospital getting to you again?" He stood up, came around the counter, kissed his mother on the cheek, and took his glass to the sink to wash it out dutifully. The small, ill-funded rural scout troop continued for a couple more years after I left it. Those who stayed with it seemed to get something out of it, more than I did, apparently. One of those who pursued his scouting goals wholeheartedly was Kevin Primo. In later years, he was to point proudly at the framed display of his various badges, patches, and certificates when dealing with extra special customers at the car dealership where he was, sporadically, top salesman. "It's one more thing that assures the customer of my trustworthiness," Primo explained to Brigson. That afternoon, Brigson returned to his home full of ideas. How could he show his trustworthiness to his customers? True, he didn't have an office like Primo, but he did have a small cubicle that might accommodate something. With his wife irritated at his desperate rambling through the house, Brigson hunted for mementos of his past. He found a receipt from the driver's education course he had been forced to take in connection with his DUI several years ago. He looked at it with a smile. No, it would not do. "Pam," he called to his wife, "didn't I have a trophy around here somewhere?" "What?" she demanded. She was sipping a beer and flipping through the paper. Brigson repeated his query from the nearer position of the doorway to the dining room where his white woman sat. "You've got that best pig trophy your father won in high school," she replied. No, a trophy of mine," Brigson cried, tearing through a box of Christmas tree ornaments. "You don't mean that perfect attendance award you got in the 3rd grade?" Brigson looked up, a string of tinsel clutched in one fist. "That's it! Did he find it?" "No, I don't think so. I think one of his kids used it in a diorama, after which it was thrown away or semi-permanently enshrined on a shelf at the school. Would that there was something left of me at my old school. The Steely Dan song warns me against such sentimentality, especially given the deleterious effects my various schools had on me. But the one I have in mind probably had the most nearly benign effects, and now that my kids have gone there, moved on as well, I wish there was something of them there forever, or semi-permanently. The marks I made most nearly indelibly are the ones I made on people I've known. I know that's true because the marks they all made on me are still here. I remember people more than I do places or things. Maybe that's why I draw and paint almost exclusively people. Maybe not. It's just as likely that I depict what I depict and how I depict it because of the influence of illustrative art prevalent at the time of my childhood. Remember the character Jot and the backgrounds he was in? Who can remember color forms? Simple toys. I haven't bought my kids a video game system, something I'm sure they'll curse me for one day, the way I cursed my parents for years because they wouldn't take me to see Star Wars. All through 1977, as people around me discussed it endlessly, as they spoke of multiple viewings, paraded the toys connected with it, I sat ignorant, borderline psychotic. Finally, after everyone was sick of it, deep into 1978 or 79, when the film had wound up at a drive-in, on the last night it was to play in town for 20 years, I got to see it. My parents fell asleep during it. I imagine that one of the reasons we didn't see it for so long was that my father was asking everybody, this Star Wars thing, any bad language in it? Years later, when we got our first VCR, we had no movies to watch on it. My aunt's husband loaned us a shoebox full of tapes. My father thumbed through them suspiciously. What horrors might they contain? My sister finally pointed at one, John Carpenter's remake of The Thing. I watched that at Amelia's house. It's good, she said. Any bad language in it? No, I don't think so, she stammered, unsure. 10 minutes into the movie, after the 6th or 7th unacceptable word, my father turned around and glared at my sister. "Caitlin, this language is terrible," he barked. Out the tape went. I never found out if Kurt Russell killed the Thing or not. Maybe that was another movie. They say he's married to Goldie Hawn. Can't believe her daughter divorced Chris Robinson. Is she crazy? Who is she going to find better than Chris Robinson? I would say cooler, but I'm sick of that word. Everything is cool now. I try to say neat when I can, but even that is worn out. Frisgow, probably the leader, and I say that with a near lascivious excitement in my voice, turned the volume knob on the radio down so that Bud Loop and his orchestra were but a faint moaning and popping sound. "What the hell are you listening to?" Jemima asked as she took a seat. "I took you for a real rocker, and here I find you listening to some big band shit." "Well, never mind," said Frisgow as he placed the heavy valise on the coffee table and sat down facing Jemima. "Here's the item." "What do you mean, never mind? I don't know if I can do business with somebody who I don't really know." "But you'll never really know me," Frisgow protested. "Oh, I don't mean intimately like your mental processes. I mean, you represented yourself one way at Dirk's party, and now I get here and everything's retro and the music is some old shit." Frisgow looked at his own hands. He said evenly, "Is the deal off?" "Sorry," Jemima said after a pause. "It's just that I like to make my business a pleasure." Evidently she had said that line many times before. Frisgow let his mind play over the horrific idea that Jemima had intended a sexual liaison. "Let's see the merchandise," she requested, relieving Frisgow considerably. "Well, in a way," he began, "the valise is the merchandise." "What do you mean?" Jemima's face, never more than a twitch away from expressions of suspicion or outrage, flashed a warning. "I mean, the merchandise, as you call it, is part of the valise." Frisgow began to open the bag. "Why do you keep saying valise? What's that?" Frisgow jerked the flat-bottomed bag open, ignoring Jemima's question, to reveal a human-like head, though cartoonishly distorted, in the midst of a mass of colorful wires, slowly turning stainless steel discs and other mechanical miscellany to which it was connected. "Oh, my God," Jemima croaked in her deep, southern-accented voice. Jemima's god, an intermittently malevolent deity, both patriarchal and at least as old as the Civil War, had shaved his beard and gotten a crew cut from some wing-footed, scissor-bearing attendant. He now glared at himself proudly on the perfectly reflective surface of the planet Earth and its immediate surroundings, atmosphere, satellites, and distant, once-beloved sun. "Let us make sure that Dallas Pimento's latest ploy for fans and self-employment come to naught," he boomed, all his words echoing with the exclamation points of grim finality. I don't believe in an ultimate consciousness, certainly not one that gives a damn whether men have long hair or women have abortions or children get circumcised or the whole lot of us live or die. I don't believe in a soul or a spirit world. When you're dead, as this guy named Paul, whom I used to work with at the university, said. One day at work he wasn't feeling too well, so in his lunch hour he went to the doctor and died. So I guess he knows now, I can hear you saying, but he doesn't. That's the point. Death is the cessation of all perception, all consciousness. You don't know if you're dead. This is a completely mechanistic universe, and we are completely mechanistic ourselves. "But Dallas," says the inevitable man in the middle of the auditorium, "what does that say about free will?" "It says that there isn't any such thing. We don't have free will. What we have is something that feels like free will. You know why? Because we cannot see the future." "Then why do we punish criminals?" asked the inevitable man's father-in-law. "Because we can. You're still responsible even if you couldn't help it, because space and time aren't two separate things. They're the same. And you happen to be standing right where the responsible link in the chain of cause and effect is. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. I'm not here to convince you that I'm right. In fact, I hate preaching. I hate books that preach at you. Ones where the hero is always right in his judgments of the other characters, full of good advice and righteous pronouncements on everything around him. We're all hypocrites. When I start laying down the word, I tend to go too far. I eventually start talking about working in the salt mine for your turn at the computer-generated paradise. Spell check cannot keep up with the coinage of new words, capitalized or not. All that to say, I apologize if I go on too much, venturing into poorly supported territory. S had great tits. Their texture, size, heft, weight, and shape, as well as coloration, like the upper surface of a Nabisco brand Nilla wafer, were perfect. Although I never saw them, I'm sure her nipples were equally delicious, pink like a rose in all eagerly anticipated probability. Her ass was perfect, too. In the crush of the hallway between classes, I made sure that I seized the opportunity on one heart-pounding occasion to be right behind her, to press the back of my hand against that soft, yielding ass. A few years before this, I slapped another girl's ass as we all headed for the buses. Although there were no tangible repercussions from my act, it wasn't too long before deeper insight showed me the embarrassing nature of my act, and I have ever since felt ashamed. The reason I felt I could do this was that I saw James Garner do it in a movie. He received an immediate slap. Had I received one, I might feel differently about the whole thing today. What I got, however, was the impression of confusion and some kind of subtle hurt on the part of the girl. My feelings on this were not helped by the fact that, needing to boast of the deed to someone, turned to my mother. She was about as supportive as the logical underpinnings of my theory of free will. 00 Heaven, Stairway 2. Those watching will wonder at my return to the earlier procedure of consulting a little book I keep in my non-valise for a title. Although hundreds have been entered, used, and scratched out, confirming the procedure's efficacy, I have of late been moving towards a more open plan regarding my writing, sometimes dispensing with titles altogether. Anyone approaching my secluded booth to view the work will be disappointed, however, if they seek some rational or even demonstrable connection between the title and the words beneath. It is good that they are disappointed. They have no business coming near me in the first place. Plural noun is ready. There are mathematical means of expressing the formation of sand dunes in the desert. At a certain level, sand in such great quantities acts like waves in an ocean of water. There are mathematical means of expressing the correlation between the waves in sand and the waves in water. I'm no mathematician, far from it, but I believe such a correlation would be an algorithm. Now, it seems to me that any great quantity of stuff, say for instance a desert of small green plastic soldiers, would act in the same way, given it was all the same kind of stuff. There would have to be mathematical formula for expressing the interactions of the landscape full of plastic soldiers, just as in the case of sand or water, and further ones expressing the correlation between the movements of sand to soldiers, soldiers to water, water to sand, and an even larger algorithm showing the relationships of all three taken together. Again, I'm no mathematician, far from it. But it seems to me that if you studied enough collections of stuff and kept producing more and more comprehensive formula, eventually you would reach something approaching an ultimate mathematical expression. What I want to know is work of this nature being done, and if no one has thought of this before now, can I get some sort of credit or recognition, even though I have not actually done any calculations? Need to sleep, but settle for blinking. From out of a dwelling constructed of glass soda pop bottles and adobe emerged a small man, perhaps midway between 4 and 5 feet tall, named Matrell. The ground he stood on, stepped onto, his front yard, was a sheet of plywood that sloped sharply down to the narrow stream below. The plywood, well, not really plywood, but a surface conforming in most respects to that prosaic material, was thinly populated by sexually dimorphous plants similar to sunflowers. Behind the man, named Matrell's consumer's nightmare of a home, was a flat, vertical wall that extended too far into the sky for anyone I know of to care where it ended. On it was painted a horizon, sky, and subtly smiling red sun, so that Matrell had a backyard, just one he could not corporeally enter. Actually, he had two such backyards, for inside the house, in the window that faced the wall, was inset a deep diorama that realistically portrayed the interior of a factory where one of the machines, loosed from its moorings, had begun terrorizing the unskilled laborers. Matrell sat down facing the stream and glanced at his watch. The bishop had almost fully emerged from the pickle jar. The boat should be coming into view any moment now. Matrell's view was obstructed to the right by the line of trees that separated his front yard from the egg tool foundry next door. To the left, his view was obstructed by a line of trees that separated the yard from the graphite mine that stretched into the infinity as far as anyone knew. It was to the right Matrell looked, however. This was upstream, and the point at which the boat should first appear. He began to wonder if he should have brought his book with him. The boat was taking longer than expected. The bishop was completely clear of the pickle jar, and the tip of the bear's hat could now be seen above the opening. Matrell contemplated dashing back inside to grab the book. He was reading Stormfront Motivation, ostensibly a novel, but we'll see. Had Matrell retrieved the book instead of settling for an attempt at quiet contemplation of his surroundings, he would have picked up at this point, thereby achieving his end. So the Government Council of Cosmetologists reckoned with increasingly bold analysis. For Turnblatt, however, the operation was not so much a milestone in the development of his own self-knowledge as his father's last chance for defeating the boredom of existence at the end of a long day of running from the obvious. Meanwhile, Barbara, having cheated herself of the final installment of Guidon Umbilicus, drew a hot bath. Just as she was submerging her buttocks, Gary returned home. "Barbara," he called, "are you here?" "I'm in the tub," she yelled, but not too loudly. Her voice was still sore from the angry exchange with the neighbors. Gary entered the bathroom. He immediately pulled a toy boat from his trousers pocket and placed it gently on the surface of the steaming water. "Get that out of here," Barbara commanded. The boat suddenly entered the scene without the usual preliminary sound of rippling water Matrell expected. He stood up and looked eagerly for the back of the boat, the stern, to emerge. His guest should be there. Decatur slung his rucksack into a chair at the dining room table and began unknotting the blue bandana about his neck. "Have you ever noticed that in detective or men's adventure series that the hero hooks up with a woman by the end of the book, that in the next book the woman is gone?" "What happened to the first one?" he asked Matrell. "And of course in the next book he'll meet another woman and be in love with her by the end." Matrell poured a glass of cold grape juice for his guest. "Why do they always have women for clients?" Decatur thanked his host and downed his glass in one gulp. He passed the glass back and Matrell refilled it. "How was your journey?" Matrell asked. "Journey? You make it sound so formal." "It was a trip. How's that?" "Fine by me. Do you want to see your room now?" "Might as well." Matrell led Decatur to a room in the back of the house. Along the way they passed the diorama. The machine, having fashioned a crude crown for himself from industrial plate scrapings, now set about trying to awaken some of his fellows from their stationary servitude. The workers in the factory had retreated to catwalks over the workroom floor, having been rebuffed in their efforts to occupy the offices. The management, although ineffective in their attempts to order their inferiors to attack the machine and get back to work, had been able to secure their offices for themselves and their families. Up on the catwalks, Bronson, one of the nut fitters in Operation 403, wondered if this forced segregation would lead to mutations in the genetics of the two groups. "We're all humans, after all," he griped. "Try telling that to those bastards wearing the ties," shouted Dolan as he looked down at the machine. "To them, we're just smaller versions of King Clanky down there." If the king heard, he did not respond. He busied himself fashioning a second arm for himself, one that he hoped would be able to turn the mounting bolts that kept his brothers, and future subjects, rooted to one spot. "The room is more than adequate," Decatur smiled, with his mouth turned down at the corners, musingly as it were. "I am gratified," Matrell nodded. "Plenty to read, I see," Decatur commented. He examined the small but hopeful bookshelf opposite the bed. "I hope there are some things there that you have not seen before." Ghost Dick is Swinging, Decatur read aloud one of the titles. I've wanted to read that for some time. I am gratified, Matrell smiled. However, as I indicated in my letter of the 22nd, this will be a working holiday. I may not have much time to read. I wanted to ask you about that, said Matrell. If you can give me some idea of your schedule, then I can be sure not to get in your way. Well, I generally work at night, sleep in the day. Any conflict there? None at all. I sleep in the room on the opposite side of the house, so have no fear of disturbing me. Matrell chewed an index finger as he considered what else to say. When is supper? Decatur asked. What I've in mind, Decatur paused while he chewed a mouthful of the broccoli and rotini Matrell had prepared, is something like a literary version of The Love Boat, but with illustrations, sort of children's coloring book type illustrations. Yes, Matrell urged Decatur to continue as the latter seemed to be drifted off into a reverie. Only, it won't be on a boat, Decatur suddenly returned to describing his projected work. He looked up at the ceiling. And it won't... He seemed to be grasping for the right words. And this will be a series? Matrell wanted it clarified. Yes, Decatur agreed, excited by Matrell's understanding. I love the idea of each installment bearing a different number, but uniform packaging. I also like the idea of each installment having definite parameters regarding word count. However, as they will each essentially be plotless... Plotless? Matrell interrupted. He seemed staggered by the idea. Yes, plotless in the sense that there will be no objective, no resolution. They broke me into 1,000 pieces.